the thing after duality is to come step up above it and to understand that the duality is there, and it's there in all of us, and it's there on 1,000 different spectra, from good to bad. Or, you what you might say is good, I might say is bad, and vice versa, right? So every one of us on every one of those spectra will put the cursor at a different point, right? And so there's no perfect
There's no
answer.
right or wrong. It's
There's no
just
perfect answer. You have to make your own decision. And this is exactly what Dr. Jung
And
said.
that also leads to the idea that Hitler may have been, for example, just pull somebody. If he was truly and wholly and completely himself, I mean, he wasn't he wasn't bad, in a
Right.
sense. He was just he was it's sort of fatalistic, but he was being who he was supposed to be, and the universe just created that person to be that way,
And it would have been somebody.
and yeah, I mean,
Right.
but the universe also created all these other people that said, we don't want you like that, and so
Mm-hmm.
But he was thwarted, so that, his direction, if he'd gotten into art school, he would have gone maybe this direction.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but now
There's
it
an
might have been accepted, you never
unreconcilable
know.
paradox with that, though, and that is that if we know our shadow, then we supposedly don't go there.
well, see, his shadow might have been a choir boy. I mean, he might have
Wow.
been horrible for him to be a choir boy,
Mhm.
and he would have had to go out and be evil, what we would call evil, because that was his fate.
But he didn't see himself as evil, so the
And-
thing,
and
he
he
saw
wasn't.
himself as the choir boy.
In terms of what he had to live by becoming and individuating himself,
Right.
he wasn't. He was.
He was
He was
protecting
just. He
something,
was
right?
living out
Picasso.
his. He was following his bliss.
Yeah.
It was the
Yeah. But I mean,
Picasso tyranny
As
then.
horrible as that.
and you have to understand what he was facing.
Yeah.
I mean, he came out of the
Not sure
German
about it.
army as a corporal, and he was living in a homeless shelter for 3 years. Now, these aren't homeless shelters like we have today. He had a library, and they were feeding these guys and so on, right? So every night at 5 o'clock, he'd go in there and be in there with the library. So he educated himself for 3 years, and taught himself to be a public speaker. And then the Germans had horrible inflation during the early 20s, right? Horrible. And things were really, really bad in Germany in the 20s. And then they didn't get any better until the early 30s, when Hitler started to get things together, because he got the German military industrial complex going, and that created jobs, and that gave people things to do, and something to feel good about. But they, after the Allies after the war jammed this Treaty of Versailles down the throat of the Germans, and it was so punitive. It was punitive because of World War One, and so it was so punitive that the men were naturally going to rebel against it, and so Hitler just came along and said, "Well, screw that. Let's build tanks," right? And I mean, it's not that simple, but in 1923, he was at a table with one more person than this, sitting at a table, and there were 7 of them that organized the Nazi Party.
I'm almost seeing a parallel with Putin, because they were kind of emasculated, if you think about it, when the Soviet Union fell and Gorbachev, made these concessions, and that was seen as a great horror, basically, to the older people who wanted the Stalinist times back. I mean, it's crazy to think of,
Get the
but
empire back together.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like an undercurrent there. So that almost sounds like, that when you say World War One, if he was, trying to regain that, it's an ego thing.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm reading a fascinating novel right now called All the Light We Cannot See. And have you seen it? Have you read it?
Yeah, I read about this much of it.
Oh, it's a phenomenal
I stopped
book
reading something else.
that focuses on the lives of 2 people. One is a French girl who starts out at age 12, I think, who's blind, and a German boy in 1940, by the way. So she's 12 in 1940, and a German boy who's 14 in 1940, and it follows his life and how he was sent to a school for advanced kids, and you just see how his mind was taken over by the Nazi ideology, and how all the German men were just taken over. They were overwhelmed. They couldn't control it. And remember, early on we were talking about group psychology. I mean, one of Jung's famous quotes is, if you have 100 men in a room, you have one blockhead. Okay.
Just one?
Well, you have 100 blockheads maybe, but it creates
Speak in unison.
yeah, they speak in unison. Everybody falls in, and so as long as we're all talking, it's okay. But if everybody was just sitting here like in a college lecture and just saying pretty soon everybody, we could put music to it.
See, that's interesting, because I was at my reunion recently, and my oldest son was with me.
Mhm.
He was going to go and see my sister and cousins and stuff, but they bailed on him, so he went with me to the reunion. And so we're in there, and he's talking to some of my old friends. And my old friends were pretty crazy.
Mhm.
And one of them had him aside and said, your dad. My son said, "What? How did my dad fit in?" And he said, "Your dad grounded us." And the way I grounded him was, here's a guy driving like a maniac down a road, going through stop signs, and I say, "Let me out." That's called grounding.
You're gonna tolerate
when
your
they did
BS.
stuff like that, I kept saying, I like you guys, but you pushed it too far this time.
This is
I
too
get
much.
out. And so I was always doing that. So that's why they always said I was the one who was grounding.
And
I
so
gotta
the
think
next
about
step in psychic development and in Buddhism
The
too
thing
is to
about
be above the
dualities
duality.
Is that one side or the other can't win. It's going to always be frustrating for everybody.
Right.
as it
Okay.
stays in
And
the
that's
middle.
by the way, the transcendent function.
And you
So,
got to learn to live with that. You can't act like
You
a
can't
pack
leave
of
the
guys
country.
thinking you have to win everything.
well,
gotta-
or something else has to emerge, right? And that's the transcendent function. And this is what I.
So that's being above the duality then, the transcendent function.
No,
right?
it's coming from the duality. Okay, a symbol has
Yeah,
to
it's
emerge
like
from the
sports or
duality.
something.
So let me explain this
Or
to you.
religion, huh?
These are handouts. So this is a letter from Dr. Jung about transcendent function. The point about the transcendent function is you have a duality, and it's like the yin and yang in Asian philosophy, right? And as long as the thing is moving, and it's always going to move, and there are these yin yangs within yin yangs within yin yangs 1,000 times, right, in all of our psyches. And you can think of it as the spectrum, and your cursor's moving back and forth on the spectrum, good and bad, good and evil, whatever it is, Republican, Democrat, whatever it is. Okay, and
Good, evil, Republican, Democrat. Nice one, Skip.
well, at least
It was a Freudian
That was
slip.
a Freudian slip.
at least I had the Republicans on the same side as the good, right?
I don't remember that.
No, but look, so okay, the movie Apollo 13 has a terrific example of this. It's on my website, and the video is on my website, but you can find it on YouTube very easily because it's putting a square peg in a round hole, right? And so there's this moment in Apollo 13 where they have to put the square filter in the round hole, right? And so the engineer has the square filter in the round hole, and he says, we got to get this to go into this with nothing but that, right? And that's exactly how we are in the country, politically, right now. And so somehow something new has to emerge, and this is alchemy, this is everything that Jung was talking about. And so in the example that's in this letter, so this is an extra copy, good. He talked about the temptation of Christ. So let me just read it to you. There are many normal cases in which, under certain circumstances, a character opposed to the conscious personality suddenly manifests itself, causing a conflict between the two personalities. Okay, take the classic case of the temptation of Christ, for example. We say that the devil tempted him, but we could just as well say that an unconscious desire for power confronted him in the form of the devil. Both sides appear here, the light side and the dark. The devil wants to tempt Jesus to proclaim himself master of the world. Jesus wants not to succumb to the temptation. Then, thanks to the function that results from every conflict, a symbol appears. It is the idea of the kingdom of heaven, a spiritual kingdom rather than a material one. Two things are united in this symbol: the spiritual attitude of Christ and the devilish desire for power. Thus, the encounter of Christ with the devil is a classic example of the transcendent function. It appears here in the form of an involuntary personal experience. But anyway, you can read more about it. But this is an example of the transcendent function, and I can tell you from my personal experience that I have had a vision of the devil.